Okay, thanks everyone. We're back, and the next session I'm pleased to welcome 4 NUJ reps from across the union who will share their insights into successful approaches to improving mental health for our members in their workplaces and branches. We're also going to look to how we can continue to keep mental health high on the agenda and build more supportive environments for discussing mental health in our branches and workplaces. And we're going to have a Q&A after the reps have spoken, so please put any questions you have in the chat. So our reps are Lynn Dergelay, who's the chair of the Oxford branch and vice chair of the Disabled Members Council and a Workplace Equality rep. Emma Boyd, who works for the Financial Times for more than 20 years in a variety of roles. She is co-deputy mother of the chapel with a special responsibility for mental health, and she's also studying to become a counsellor. Mark Fisher, who's a freelance arts writer and theatre critic. He's been secretary of the Edinburgh Freelance Branch for over 15 years. He sits on the Scottish Executive Council, the Freelance Industrial Council, and a job share on the National Executive Council. And Zainab Juma is mother of chapel for the Penguin Random House office unions. Welcome, everyone. So I'm going to start with Lynn. So do you want to begin? Thank you.
Thank you, Raj. Hi, everybody. I'm Lynn Dergelay, and I am chair of the Oxford branch and co-vice chair of the Disabled Members Council. And I'm going to start from there because I'm also then going to tell you how I got here. And I got here directly as a result of the support and the solidarity of the NUJ. I've been working for my current employer for about 14 years. And for the first few years, I worked really long hours and struggled to get promotion until I discovered that I was neurodivergent. So I was diagnosed with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder and with dyspraxia about 9 years ago. And that was the first starting point in recognizing that I didn't work in the same way as everybody else. But I realized as well that nobody else in the business was willing to say that they were neurodivergent. Nobody else was willing to say that they might have a learning difficulty. And I went through the process. I was a kind of like a sleeper agent in the NUJ at that point. So I was a member, but I wasn't an active member. And I went through the process of being diagnosed through work, and it made a really big difference being diagnosed as an adult, because it just helped me to understand what my challenges had been. So for me, there was mainly the time management, but that then affected everything else. What changed was that about 5 years into working at my current place of employment, I realized that I was working all these long hours and there had to be more. There had to be more to life. And I ended up I ended up getting hold of every book on time management that I could find to try to learn more. And coincidentally, our managing director at the time, I'm sorry, somebody is unmuted. Can you mute, please? There's background noise, thank you. Our managing director at the time sent out an email and said, my door's always open, but nobody ever comes in. I'm opening the door and you can come along and make an appointment, half an hour, talk to me about whatever you like. You can report a problem, share a success story, ask for advice, or talk to me about the cricket. And I took him up on that because I thought, brilliant, I want to know the secret of his success. And the secret of his success, as he told me, was freeing up his time to focus on what's important. And that was a real moment of clarity for me at that point, because as a result of not knowing that I was neurodivergent and trying to fit in and trying to do things the way that everybody else was doing them, I didn't have the confidence to be myself, to put myself forward for projects. And I actually realized that that was probably the same for a lot of my more junior colleagues, that they were working really long hours to try to get promoted, but that's not how to get promoted. That's just a recipe for stress and overwork. And I remember thinking that that message wasn't filtering through to other people. And I thought, well, I remember when I was working these really long hours, nobody ever came up to me and said, you know, you're working really long hours. can I help? Have you working things in the best way? Is there something that we can do to share the work as a team, or just any number of things, just noticing and speaking up and asking if there was anything that could be done. And I ended up creating a knowledge sharing group where I thought, well, what I'd do was I would teach people how to manage their time. And I was doing a coaching diploma at the same time, and I realized very quickly that it wasn't about telling people what to do. What it was bringing people together in a lunchtime informal setting and getting them to think about time management in a different way, and getting them all to share their stories in a completely anonymous and confidential space, and getting them to think about it in a different way. So for me, I'm a very visual person, and knowing that I have ADHD, I just have to think about my time management in a different way. And the example, for example, if I'm thinking about if I'm really, really busy and I'm trying to work out what I need to do next, I just imagine that I am managing air traffic control at a very busy airport, and I'm thinking, okay, I've got all these aeroplanes that are coming into land, which one's next? And when I'm thinking of deadlines, I think about, well, I've missed deadlines, but I haven't missed a flight yet in my life. And why is that? Because if I miss a flight, it might cost me a huge amount of money, or I might miss a really important kind of deadline on the other side. And so I got my colleagues to come in and to start to think about that, and to share their ideas and share their success stories, and to share their ideas, resources, success stories, experiences, and bring that together. And I very quickly realized that not everybody had the time to come along to a half-hour session that was only once a month. They were too busy to come along to this half-hour session. So I started a newsletter. And once I had the newsletter, then I could start to email that to colleagues in Australia and in the US and in South Africa and in Singapore and in China. And colleagues in India said, well, we'd like to join your session. Can we join by Zoom? So I have started GoToWebinar, but I started a webinar. That was a half-hour session, which was then recorded, which then became available. And over time, it was something that helping other people manage their own time helped me to become more organized. It gave me the confidence to be able to look at how I was managing my time. It gave me the confidence to start to speak up at union meetings. I spoke up a lot about my dyspraxia and my ADHD, and I started giving talks on how to succeed with the learning difficulty, because I remember thinking, well, there was nobody for me to talk to. There was nobody else that I could ask to when I was going through that, nobody I could talk to. And I remember thinking, I don't want anybody else to go through that. So I want to tell people that that's what I'm doing, and started a blog. I became a quality rep in my chapel, and in branch meetings then got asked if I wanted to be on the Disabled Members Council. And I remember thinking, is that something I'd like to do? And I chose to do it. And I'm so grateful that I did, because I found so much solidarity and a community and a voice, as has been said earlier, but also I was seen. My potential was seen. And I had people to talk to, because at the time back then, and we're talking sort of 4 or 5 years ago now, nobody talked about being neurodivergent in the workplace. They just didn't. So I went first, and I told my story, and I said, this is what I've done. This is how I've come to this conclusion. This is how I was diagnosed as an adult in the workplace. This is how I've put support in place. These are the people that I've talked to. And I ended up being invited to go over to Singapore and to India to run those workshops, those WorkSmart workshops in the locations with the colleagues over the course of 2 weeks. And I could never have done that if I was trying to be somebody else, if I wasn't being honest to my own strengths and my own challenges and being authentic to myself. And what I would say is that all of those things together gave me the confidence. So it was being a rep, it was being in my chapel, it was being active in my branch, it was being active in the Disabled Members Council. The union has given me absolute career progression, because I went from being a rep to being on the Disabled Members Council, to being chair of the branch, to being vice chair of the Disabled Members Council. And recently, in fact, at the end of last year, I was actually promoted in my place of work as well. I would say that when it comes to mental health, solidarity and knowing you're not alone is the biggest thing. And particularly for newer members, newer members and also newer colleagues where I work, they don't have the experience to know how to handle that. And they don't have the experience to know what their limits are. And they don't have the experience to understand that you're never going to finish it all. You've got 7 hours, you've got to decide what's really important. And sometimes it's about thinking, if I was managing myself, if I was managing Lynn, what does Lynn need? Because I can get really caught up in thinking about the managers and other people in the business. But what do I as an individual need, and how can I ask for that? And how can I support myself? And how, through being myself and talking about my challenges, when we were in the office before COVID happened, I used to mention it all the time. And my colleagues used to be quite amused how somebody would say, oh yes, I'm dyslexic as well, but wouldn't say it if somebody had asked them. But because I was willing to go first and I was willing to be open about it, they would as well. And lastly, I would say, because I have no idea what the time is, so somebody please give me a time check. But lastly, I would say that mine is an invisible impairment. It's not really invisible, it's hidden. And if you know what to look for, it is totally there. But I have made it more visible by, for example, wearing the sunflower lanyard and being open and telling my story. And I don't always have to tell people that I have attention deficit disorder, but it can be helpful to say, I don't have a very good memory, you know, can you write that down for me? I've come to accept myself. I think that's really the biggest thing, because I have a different way of seeing the world. I know I bring a lot of value to the business that I'm in. When COVID happened and we were all working from home, I reached out to the more junior colleagues and I said, you know, I'm here. Shall we do a half-hour query session? It allowed me to make time for them, to dedicate time for them. I said, this half hour once a week, you have my full attention. And then after that, that set a boundary, because then other time that would allow me to focus on my work for the rest of the week. Sometimes I'd bring more 1 or 2 people together as well in what I call campfire sessions, so that they could share that information between each other. And I was able to do that because of the confidence that I developed as a result of running Work Smart, which it was a global community of up to 400 people at one point. I got to network with loads of senior people and senior executives by talking about Work Smart rather than myself. I look back and I think it was almost like having an avatar, being able to create like a brand, but also an image for myself of who I'd like to be, because I was the head of Work Smart, which was this knowledge sharing group and this community. And one of the things that happened as a result of running these sessions for my colleagues, which I did over the course of 6 months, was that I was nominated for an award at work as well. So really it's about connecting with people and knowing you're not alone. It has been the biggest thing that has helped me in not just being part of the union. And what I really value about being a union member is that everyone is just authentic. Everyone is completely allowed to be themselves. And we want everybody to be the best that they can be. And it's been wonderful.
I think that is a really impressive, proactive approach, and, you know, absolutely in awe. Thank you so much for that. A really fantastic insight into what it's been like for you. And, you know, and interestingly, I was in Cardiff last week for the BBC's new buildings open there, and I noted that they did actually had made a serious effort to make the floor colours particularly, you know, I can't think of the word, but you know, that would help neurodivergent, and they were important sort of inclusion issues that they thought about when they were designing that building. And I think things have come a long way since, perhaps when you first realised and had your diagnosis. So really impressive, thank you. And I just want to read out what John's said on the chat, John Crowley, about the solidarity and the power of forming networks. Just knowing someone out there is going through the same or similar experience with you makes you feel less alone, and we can all help each other with tips, advice and insights, which is great, and that sounds exactly what you've done. So thank you, Lynn, for that. I'm going to move on to Emma now, who works for the Financial Times and is the co-deputy mother of the chapel there for mental health. So Emma, if I can ask you to come forward, thank you.
Hi there, everyone, and well done, Lynn. Honestly, that's quite an inspirational tale. And I know that at least one person that I've been representing over a number of years has recently had the same diagnosis as you. And that's partly, I suppose, what I want to talk about is what it's been like for me, knowing how important it is to recognise mental health, and having been at the FT for so long, seeing how it's been a long journey to get to the point where we have recognition and where I've been able to do a case that I'd like to talk about in some detail. So I think we were consulting on this over a number of years. We have regular consultations with management. We're fortunate in that we have that close relationship where we can work. And I think about a decade ago, we started pressing for more recognition. And there is now an employer-led network for mental health and well-being at the FT. And I think that's where there's now kind of mediums for those experiences, such as you've been talking about, where they can be shared openly. And I think that has helped to bring it more clearly into management's mind. But a case that I want to talk about, and I think this actually refers to a number of cases I've dealt with, is where this particular individual was beginning to suffer the effects of stress, actually, which was resulting in lack of sleep and also in difficulty performing his regular tasks at work. And this was being dealt with. And I think this is probably something that happens right the way through journalism and maybe all through work. This was being dealt with as a performance management issue. So it had got to my attention when he was under so much stress, he hadn't realized he'd hit the first red flag, and that he'd had a verbal warning, but didn't even realize he'd had a verbal warning. And, it was just, he was so overloaded with what was happening. And I was able to find out that he was actually in a brand new job that had only just been created, like within the past year, that his line manager had kind of decided that the job was all these tasks. And I discussed it with our father of the chapel, Steve Bird, that some of you may know. And Steve said, well, I bet they haven't done a risk assessment of that job. So I went to management and said, we demand that you do a risk assessment. We want to know, if there are any mental health risks to the current job description. And this went to and fro a bit. HR were not happy with this question, but they realized they did have it was incumbent on them to do a proper look at the job. In the end, I managed to get them to kind of spell out what all of his tasks were. I independently got the person I was representing to say how long each of those tasks would take per day, an estimation. And I got and I asked HR to do the same for the manager, to also kind of say how long she thought each of these tasks should take. And then we demanded a kind of independent party somewhere in the organisation. We're fortunate in that it's a very large organisation, to take a look and to decide how long he thought these tasks should take. And we managed to win the admission that it was impossible for my poor person that I was representing to fulfill what his line manager was asking him to do. So what that meant is that the job was trimmed down enormously. They recognized that he had been under a huge amount of stress. He was given time off. And when he returned to work, the workload was substantially reduced to the point where he had half a chance of being able to fulfill it. So I think, this kind of speaks to the solidarity that John Crowley was talking about before. You need to have somebody who's consistently saying, no, this isn't right, and when somebody is perhaps angry, I'm dealing with another case at the moment where there's a kind of a breakdown in relationship, but really it's relating to personal circumstances that this person is having to deal with at home. And that what that looks like from the manager's point of view is somebody who is impossible to handle. What's actually happening is that poor individual is having a bit of a breakdown, and it's coming out in terms of anger, in terms of inability to do their own time management, as you were talking about, Lynn. So reminding, I find a lot of my role is reminding managers that mental health problems aren't necessarily just depression and weeping. They will exhibit in a number of ways. They could exhibit in simply absenteeism. Back pain is a proxy. We now know that back pain is a proxy for mental health issues. So you've got to look much more broadly. And I think, sadly, the other thing you mentioned, Lynn, was providing training and finding that people can't even find the time to turn up. And so mental health training is provided at the FT for managers to help them to recognise what's going on in their teams, but they don't even find the time to turn up to learn more about it. So I think it's just kind of essential, really, that at the union that we are consistently bringing that message to our consultations and asking that it has a high status, and reminding employers of their our employers of their legal responsibility to do so. Because to discriminate against someone on the grounds of a long-term mental health disability is a condition that becomes a disability, and that's against the law. That's the bottom of it. And then there's the ethical thing. It's just not nice, and I often find I'm appealing to people on the basis of, can we just be kind? So anyway, I hope that's somewhat interesting to everybody here.
I think it's very interesting, Emma. I think that, one of the things that as a BBC employee and an NUJ rep, the first thing I would ask for is a risk assessment for anyone who's in that situation, and do so on a regular basis. And I would expect them to do that. And also to do stress risk assessments at any point where it is going to result in an increase in workload for any of our members.
Yeah, I don't think it was ever done before at the FT. So that's the first time that we've asked for that.
Yeah.
And I think they were shocked to be asked for it, because I think there is a kind of understanding that there's a risk assessment needed if there's physical danger, that people tend to neglect the mental dangers that some roles represent.
Yeah, and it can become a cultural issue in many workplaces where that isn't thought of as, as a high priority. And certainly that seems to be the case. Yeah, and Caroline has mentioned and put a link in the chat about the employer's legal duty on risk assessment. So, anyone who needs to look at that, it's there on the chat now. And we also have an event on mental health and a collective approach at health and safety in the workplace is one of our workshops that will be taking place over the next month, on the 10th of May, actually, this one. So
just to say, one of the things we're looking at the moment, and this is more broadly, is the effect of the long-term lockdowns and now the being asked to come back to work. And so one of the things I'm consistently trying to engage on at the moment is to ask the FT to recognise that some people have a genuine mental, block about the idea of coming back. And this is not a logical thing that can be explained by the prevalence of coronavirus or how infectious it is. Sometimes it's more related to something more general about a deep anxiety that has to be recognised and needs to be dealt with in a particularly sensitive way if we're going to be successful in getting those people back to the office. And here, this is very interesting for me, because I can recognise that due to isolation, it would be very helpful for some individuals to do that. But I think that it has to be managed very sensitively and not just, fewer sticks and more carrots, basically, is what I'm trying to argue for at the moment.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Emma. Appreciate that now. I'm going to move on to Mark. Can I introduce you to Mark, if you can?
Thank you very much. Thanks, Raj. Fascinating contributions from Lynn and Emma there. They're both really absorbing. Thank you for that. And you were picking up, and I'd like to pick up on comments both of you made, and that echo what Michelle Stanistreet said right at the start of today. She talked about all of our members need to feel that the NUJ is there for them, and that's Natasha said something similar. It's a sort of recurring theme of the day, and I think we did this in Edinburgh Freelance Branch in quite an instinctive way, and I'm not going to be able to give you any great lessons or even anecdotes about mental health, but just I suppose what I can do is talk about how Edinburgh Freelance responded to the pandemic in particular, and that feeling of telling our members that we were there for them. We weren't doing anything more than telling them we were there for them. We were just saying we're going to be there for you. And I've just been looking back at I find this fascinating to go back to March 2020, to my calendar of everything that I was doing at that point. I work as a theatre critic, and on Saturday, the 14th of March, 2020, I can see that I saw the last play that last first night before the pandemic was, shut down all the theatres. It was Barefoot in the Park at Pitlochry Theatre, Festival Theatre, if any of you care for that. But on the following Monday the 16th, we were due in Edinburgh Freelance Branch to have a student night. And this is something that we had tried before very successfully, actually, which was to invite the students primarily from Napier University, that does a very good journalism course, to select among themselves 4 speakers who were about to complete their dissertations. And the idea was going to be that each of these students would talk about their dissertation topic, and there would be a question and answer thing, and it was a way of engaging student membership and also educating those of us who are beyond the student stage in what those people were doing. So we were all still set to do that on that Monday. But gradually the universities were starting to close down because of this looming threat that was coming from Italy called coronavirus. And Napier itself was quite slow in doing that. It was one of the later universities to do it, but gradually we realized that these student speakers were just not going to show up. And so we had to cancel that event. And I think it was the following Thursday that finally the government said, no, we're in lockdown now. But there was that sort of weird thing where audiences were being told not to go to the theatres, but theatres themselves hadn't been told to stop operating, and so it was uncertain for us whether we should press ahead with that student night, because officially we still could have done it at that point. So at that point, Joyce Macmillan, who is the chair of Edinburgh Freelance Branch, and I started talking to each other, and we had a sort of useful sort of symbiotic combination of viewpoints. I'd heard about this newfangled thing called Zoom that I'd been reading about, and which she hadn't heard about, and she also had that sense very, very strongly. And again, coming back to this thing that Michelle started off by saying, that we should let our members know, particularly freelance members who we believed to be particularly vulnerable at that time, that we were there for them. That was all the simple idea. So we said, well, let's see if we can try and have a meeting on Zoom, because we had no other way of meeting in real life at that point. And so I'm checking again my calendar, it was Tuesday the 24th. So basically the Tuesday after lockdown, we had our first online freelance branch meeting. We had it in the afternoon, and we just thought we'd try it there, and it was just to let people know that we were there for them. Now, I have to say, in the subsequent 2 years, I'm not aware of any specific issue that we've had to deal with where somebody said, oh, I'm in financial distress, or I'm in emotional distress, or any of the sort of topics that we've been discussing today in an explicit way. But I do wonder whether the sense of communality, the sense of being there, the sense of familiarity and friendship that we were able to offer has in some way been beneficial. I can't define it, but except to say that people are, well, say first of all, bizarrely, really, we've kept up that weekly meetings. We were a monthly, like most branches, we met monthly before that, but we decided to meet weekly just to have that social interaction that was, of course, hugely missing during the lockdown months. And we've kept on. We're still doing it now. We're still meeting weekly, still meeting online every Monday afternoon. Several members of the NUJ who are actually part of this group have addressed us at different times. And so I like to think that sense of being there for people was respected and is even now, because even now every so often we say to the members, oh, should we keep on doing these weekly meetings? And they always say, oh yes, we like them. and it had a number of knock-on effects, one of which I suppose I shouldn't talk about too much, but one of which is that very much like Natasha was saying earlier, the facility that Zoom allows us, and this meeting that we're doing right now is a case in point. You can bring people together from all over the country, in fact, all over the world. We've had meetings addressed by people in France, and have we done America? I can't remember, a bit of and certainly all over the UK, and Ukraine, in fact, as well. So there is a sort of technical ability to be able to get people. You're only asking them to be there, to give up an hour of their time, not hours of traveling plus accommodation, all the rest of it. So there's a huge thing there that we've been able to do. The frequency has also meant that we've been able to pick up very quickly on topical issues such as Ukraine, or if there's a dispute in the media that becomes contentious. So that's been all very good. But in addition to that, just on a sort of human social level, which we're talking about today, we've got members who are attending regularly who in fact, some of them I've never even met in real life. They're people that didn't come to regular monthly in-person meetings, but one reason or another have found it conducive to come to the online meetings. And I suppose we'd have to ask them individually whether that had given them some sort of nourishment to be there, to know that they're there. But sometimes there can be all sorts of reasons for that. Sometimes they might just live too far away from the centre of town where we would normally be meeting. Sometimes it would be inconvenient for domestic reasons, for family responsibilities and so on. Sometimes it could be to do with disability, and a couple of members have observed how Zoom has become a much more accessible way of identifying with the union than meeting in real life, which can sometimes create certain obstacles for people to come. So there's all of that side of things, and then the frequency itself has then created a sort of dynamic which meant that we have achieved things that we just wouldn't be able to achieve in anything like the same sort of period of time if we were meeting monthly, because decisions take so long to be made. But we can just sort of say, well, let's do this next week, and we do it next week. And in particular, the big success story we had early on was that we picked up on the NUJ's news recovery plan, adapted it slightly to our own circumstances and to Scotland, and approached a number of MSPs and a couple of MPs from the various parties to ask them to engage in particular in the idea of public interest journalism, and to try and lend support on a Scottish governmental level to those principles that the NUJ had set out. And remarkably, pretty much across the board, we had support from initially, bizarrely, from the Scottish Tories, but also from the Scottish Labour, from the SNP, and from the Greens. I think the Liberals were the only people that we didn't manage to quite capture, and all of them committing to the idea of public interest journalism and the importance of journalism. But we wouldn't have been able to do that if we weren't meeting so frequently. So that's really just a question of frequency. But I think that sense of dynamic, to be able to pick up on ideas, to respond to members' suggestions of what a good idea would be for a meeting or a discussion or whatever, I think has made a lot more people more engaged with the union, and as well as the things that we've achieved as a result of that. So if people want to ask more questions about the detail of how those meetings have operated, of course, there's a lot of work involved in keeping it going, but there's a sort of rhythm that we've fallen into that's made this possible. And so I suppose I started off saying that I haven't got any big stories to talk about mental health, but perhaps the evidence of what we've done in Edinburgh Freelance is that sense of just being there for people. And should anybody have any mental health problems, should anybody have financial problems or any of the things that the pandemic has thrown our way, we have theoretically at least been there for them.
Thank you, Mark, much appreciated. And yeah, we can't emphasize the importance of how the union is there to support and help workers and our members. Yeah, Zainab, I'd like to bring you in now if you can start. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Zainab. I'm Mother of Chapel at Penguin Random House UK for the Office Chapel. I have been at Penguin for about 8 years, and I think, although time has no meaning anymore, that I have been Mother of Chapel for 4 years. I may be utterly wrong about that. I'm going to talk a little bit more about sort of what we do practically on a day-to-day basis to sort of advocate for mental health support and for members within the workplace. And it sort of breaks down into 3 areas. And those, I suppose, I would broadly categorize as advocacy, benefits, and I suppose like systems interventions. So talking about advocacy a little bit, and just for context, we are a recognized workplace within a recognized chapel within a pretty decent employer with pretty progressive policies, and we have a good relationship with them as well. But that doesn't mean that everyone gets access to everything they need. So the first piece of advocacy we do is literally just access to care. We have a great employee assistance program, but the take up is incredibly low on it. So one of the things that we do is very simply ensure that people understand how to access the things that they are entitled to. I think particularly when you are dealing with any trauma or anxiety or depression in particular, just the prospect of accessing services alone can be really, really daunting. There are triaging processes to go through before you get to therapy or counselling, and all of it can be, in some cases, re-traumatizing. So one of the things that we do is just make sure that people are aware of what they're entitled to, how to use it, and offer to help them use it if appropriate. One of the other things that we do, I think particularly around workloads, is we send semi-regular, I'm a little behind on them, surveys to try and understand what disciplines within publishing are particularly affected by sort of I suppose a stretching of people's hours. Emma, your point about actually asking for risk assessments and role profiles is a really good one. And I am going to go back, I think, particularly for people working in editorial and publicity who are working far too many hours. And I think that might be a really constructive approach for us to take. We obviously, like everyone else does, sort of advocate for members with specific needs. So ensuring, and most people behave well, but every now and then someone doesn't, ensuring that reasonable adjustments are in fact properly implemented. And we kind of act as police a little bit on that, and just ensure as well that members are sort of having those conversations in comfortable and represented ways. Everyone behaves a little bit better when there's a rep in the room. So we're always happy to be there taking notes. One of the things that we do for advocacy as well is thinking about particular crunch points in the year when mental health becomes an issue. So, for example, we've very recently had our performance review period. I'm very sorry, I'm in an office where the lights keep going off. I'm just going to sit here in the dark, otherwise I've got to do this like crazy arm dance. yes, we've just had our recent performance review sort of period, and one of the things that we will do then is email our members and just ask them to let us know if either their mental health is being conflated with their performance, so that we can kind of step in and tap on the sign and remind people what they are not supposed to do, or if they have mental health needs that are not being properly, I suppose, accommodated within discussions of performance. So that is, it's a busy time at the moment. The majority of people, as I said, behave fairly well, but every now and then a manager pops up who has paid no attention to what their duties and responsibilities are as someone who looks after people. So onto the benefits section of it, access to care kind of falls into that as well. We are currently having a conversation with the company about expanding the actual mental health care benefits within our benefits package. Watch this space. So like just making sure that we use our time with the company to sort of think about tangible solutions. We have also recently requested, given the cost of living crisis, that managers are given very specific training on how to handle financial stress. Financial stress is one of the biggest indicators for mental health, for poor mental health. So that's something that we're working on as well. And then finally, systems, I suppose. So this is more to do, I suppose, with the way that the business runs and the way that employees organize themselves, and ensuring that we're sort of present in all of those places. So we work with all of our employee networks really regularly. So we have kind of connections with all of our employee networks to ensure that there is nothing we miss. So there are very specific mental health issues, for example, amongst Black and Brown members or amongst members with disabilities. And we try and make sure that we're working with those networks so that we understand where we can support. We recently successfully advocated for increasing our holiday allowance at entry level. So our top level remains the same, but you now get 2 extra, you basically go through it faster and accumulate holiday faster. And that is allowing people who are just starting at Penguin to have more time to be able to take to themselves. And we also sit on our company's future of work sort of forum, so that we can advocate for those future of work conversations to properly take mental health into consideration, and for the decisions that we make to properly, I suppose, measure impact on mental health. Just popping through. Oh, and the last thing I was going to say, since it doesn't fall into necessarily any of those categories, and you know, again, I'm lucky to be mother of chapel in a workplace where you can make the case for providing structural support for people on a pretty human level. But one of the things that I think is worth pointing out is that I think particularly over the last couple of years, people have been struggling with their mental health more and more for various reasons. There is global politics, climate change is an enormous contributor to mental health, to poor mental health, particularly amongst younger people. And it's essentially becoming endemic. And one of the things that we are constantly reminding the sort of management of Penguin Random House is that even for individual people who don't necessarily see it as their duty as an employer to deal with this, who see it as a kind of personal problem, we are dealing with more and more drops in productivity. We are dealing with more and more long-term absence as a result of poor mental health. And it is getting to the point where there is no way that this is not an economic issue for the company, and that they are essentially just not getting their money's worth anymore. So I think just a little bit of something from me, I suppose, for anyone who's finding those conversations in their workplace difficult, is start to tot up how many man hours you are losing to people who are not able to work properly or who are having to take extended time away from the workplace. And I think it's a really good opener to how to actually have those conversations in a way that for people who do have, let's say, a more transactional view to how they treat their workers, like start with your side of the transaction. You're losing money by not investing in the mental health of the people that you employ. Yeah, so I shall conclude there.
would you say that your employers are actually quite progressive then, Zainab? It sounds like it.
Yeah, definitely. So they've recently upgraded our employee assistance program to include unlimited counselling. I had a meeting with our benefits team and the person in HR who looks after the wellness sort of policies to basically have a look at what potentially we could invest in as a business that's a more sort of like universal mental health care as opposed to mental health support. Because I think it's really important to make the point that there is that there is actually a standard for healthcare that goes beyond what most employee assistance programs offer. And we're in a really good place. I would have to say one of the things that is very, very tricky is that we are kind of one big umbrella company as Penguin Random House, but we operate 9 individual publishing houses, as well as a whole bunch of group functions. And all of those have got very unique cultures. And some of those cultures are better than others. So one of the things that we try and do is spot both the disciplines that are more prone to kind of a mental health care risk, I suppose. So things like editorial and publicity, where like your time is truly stretched, but also having a look, like trying to spot the patterns of, I suppose, like departments within the business where there are issues. And that also helps us as a committee of reps to understand where to devote our energy. It's very difficult to spread our resource that widely. So I think just like really focusing on where the sort of crisis points are has really helped us to sort of like raise the standard across the board.
That's great. Thank you very much, Zainab. I appreciate that. I'm just wondering if anybody else from the panel would like to comment on that or anything else that's been said.
I'm just going to say, actually, we've had similar very rapid progress at the FT. So we've also just upgraded our systems to give, so for on people who are on the benefit system, that's provided by Aviva, they can also access unlimited counselling now. And I think what you were saying was really interesting about reminding people about the EAP, the Employee Assistance Programme that the FT also supplies. And I think that was really interesting for me. So what I did is, in order to experience the hurdles that people were experiencing that I'd heard anecdotally, I actually went into it myself without anything in particular to bring there for a 6-session short counselling, package, if you like. And I immediately identified a number of problems. So I was able to bring that back to HR and go, no, it's really confusing. You have to make these choices and it's not clear what you're going to get. And you get suddenly pushed into an online thing, which no one wanted to do. Well, maybe you would want to do, but it's certainly not what I was looking for, but it wasn't clear that that's the way it was going to go. So I then subsequently rang up and did a whole kind of, I interviewed the EAP program head manager provider to see exactly how they would handle, to reassure myself, like, okay, if you've got somebody who's actually suicidal, what do you do? How do you handle that? And was able to actually bring that back and report that back to HR as well. So I was able to show the strengths that I discovered, but also the weaknesses. But I think the greatest weakness of all is, as you identified, Zainab, it's the fact that they're not well posted, and there's a stigma, especially for people who don't use services like that frequently, to accessing them. And so they're very fearful of what that's going to feel like. And I don't really know how best to, encourage the usage of it. I don't know how we can improve that, in the union. I think it's great that it exists, but how do I help to encourage members to actually do it?
We have Emma, we've got a union inbox where people can just like, it's where we send our emails from and everything, but I've set up an automatic reply just so that when basically if someone emails me and I can't get back to them in the next couple of days, it replies with firstly a bit of a service level agreement, like I will get back to you, I'm very, very sorry, also day job, but also just like a list of what they can access while they're waiting as well. And I think that's been really, really helpful.
What a great idea.
Yeah,
I'm going to take that back.
I'm on my phone doing Zoom, which is like a really bad idea, and my phone keeps ringing. Just one other thing, Emma, to flag, you were talking about those like really high risk scenarios where you have someone who is at risk of real harm. One of the things that Penguin Random House has in place that I would really encourage you to advocate for at the FT is we have sort of like trained first aiders across the business, as most companies do, but we also have very specifically trained mental health first aiders, and they are trained to look out for risk signs, and their names are signposted. So like the mental health first aider in your
Interestingly
department
enough,
or
they
floor
were
is
going to
flagged.
implement that across the FT. I signed up, and then they suddenly changed their mind and decided not to fund that. So
It's so good. It's so good. 100% fight for it to come back. It's amazing.
Thank you both. I'm just going to open the floor to any questions. So if you want to put anything in the chat, there's plenty of comments in there that I can read out. But if you do have questions, then please put them in the chat, and I will try and get to them as much as possible. We've got a Q&A session now. And also just to remind you that you can tweet about today. So it's at NUJ official, and it's hashtag NUJ Mental Health. So you can tweet on social media about today's events. So anybody, okay, so Yin Lee is asking, has anyone got effective recommendations for getting managers to come up with a kind of expected approach to the issue for all? So anybody want to?
Well, so we've engaged on that at the FT. So we are, in fact, this is a constant battle to try and make sure the messaging is coming from the top. So we have these very nice kind of consultations with senior managers, but then we're going, okay, how do line managers understand this? So we are constantly trying to say, make sure that this is being communicated. So it was good during the pandemic in a way, because I think that it was just more present in people's minds. So the messaging was that, you know, please check in with your team every day or at least every week on a non-work related phone call. So just like, how are you doing? Are the kids driving you mad yet? And that sort of thing. And I think that was good. And I think it's probably less good now. I think that's a continual battle, I would say. I don't know whether Zainab would agree.
Zainab?
Yeah, definitely. One of the things that we do that's kind of practice from our director of our department, which I really love, is that at the beginning of any meeting, everyone just gives themselves a score out of 10, like literally just a mood check. And it just means like, and you don't have to expand on it, but you know, if I say I'm a 3, she'll check in with me later and see if there's anything that I need help with, anything that can be taken off my plate. So just, I think, and it's just sort of back to Lynn's point that like, it's really difficult to talk about having poor mental health in the workplace, because it can, you know, in the wrong environment, it can be taken as a bit of a sign of weakness. But like, if you know who your allies are on like a personal level, it means at least being able to have someone who can either advocate for you or help you to sort of you know, take things off your plate or whatever it is. But yeah, it is getting, I think it's very difficult to establish as a practice, I think, that constant check-in with each other.
Yeah, thank you. There's from Nika, there is any thoughts on low-cost counselling and therapy for freelancers? I have friends who call the Samaritans for free sessions, possible via the NHS, but very long waiting lists. So
if it's bereavement related, there's also Cruise, which offers free 1 session counselling for an immediate crisis. And then if they decide something is more complex, for example, inability to get over grief, that's perhaps something that happened a long time ago, then, you know, you can be within their services for free longer term counselling as well. In terms of finance, which is many people have pointed out, is very strongly related to mental health issues, the Citizens Advice Bureau is a really good first stop for signposting to other agencies that might be able to help.
thank you. Lynn, I think you had your hand up. Sorry if I didn't see you.
That's okay. And then I suddenly realized I'm on the panel. Do I really need to put my hand up? But I didn't want to interrupt anyone. I was thinking on the, just briefly on the previous bit about talking about mental health in the office. One of the things that I did with my manager is I talk about the weather as a way of talking about how my mood is. And if I'm trying to talk about my work, I use the example of traffic. And that just, for me, it just separates it because it feels far too personal. But it was a way of being able to say, you know, how's the weather? Well, it's a bit rainy over here, or it's really gloriously sunny. And then allow that kind of that conversation to follow on from there. And the other one is the waving, not drowning. That was it. Does everybody know the poem about, you know, the man who was waving like mad and everyone was waving back at him and actually he was drowning? Well, when colleagues are really stressed, I'd ask, hey, how are you doing? Are you waving or drowning? Nobody will ever say they're drowning, but they might say, I'm edging into the deeper water. I'm kind of swimming back to shore. It's a way of making it a little bit more safe to talk about what's going on and to test the waters and see if somebody is willing or capable or able to have that conversation. And sometimes it's not about talking to your manager. So I've certainly spoken to mental health first aiders where I work, and it's about being able to talk to somebody who is similar to like a rep. You know, it's being able to talk to somebody who can be that objective person from the outside, give a little bit of signposting and advice and guidance. If the person is in distress, they can really support them with that as well. I've done the mental health awareness course. I haven't done the mental health first aid, but absolutely invaluable. Yeah, you wouldn't have a workplace where you couldn't deal with somebody if they broke their leg. Why would you not have mental health first aiders to help people? And especially since COVID, mental health has been so much of a bigger issue over the last 2 years. People have been so much more open about it. Is it like 1 in 4 people experience anxiety? That's a huge number of people. So and there was the bit about, you know, the employee assistance program, for example, as well. It's about being able to have those spaces to say what's going on, to work through what you are feeling, and then to be able to take that to your manager once you've in a very calm way, to be able to say, right, you know, these are my rights, this is what I need, these are my limits. That's certainly been my experience.
Thank you, Lynn. Yeah, Mark, did you want to add anything?
No.
Okay, I'm just, there's quite a lot of resources being put in chat. Penny Duggan is saying that she had a referral from her doctor to the charity Mind, and you can actually self-refer to that as well.
Yeah, quite a few boroughs have a self-referral system so that you don't have to go via a GP and kind of deal with that wait. So I would definitely look up wherever you are and find out. I think one thing I was just going to say as well is, in a workplace where perhaps the standard of support for mental health care is a little lower, one thing I would 100% do is actually have a look at organisations like Mind and the NHS, actually, because they have published kind of minimum standards around care, which I think are perhaps more authoritative to quote than necessarily sort of like what your beliefs are around what should be done in a workplace. So I would definitely recommend like citing resources and showing receipts about sort of like what the accepted standard is supposed to be if people are falling short.
Yeah, and just to remind everyone that we will share resources from today to everyone who's on the session. There is a question from Anne Galpin to Emma. With anxiety about returning to the workplace, is there clear signposting about the COVID safety precautions in place?
Yes, I tried to answer that in the chat. So there is, so we engaged. There's been massive improvement to air filtration systems, which they claim are now the best in UK. And this is kind of communicated in messages from management and also in, you know, on placards near the lift where we are continuing to ask people to self-test at a minimum of 2 times a week. And those tests are provided by the company, so you don't have to buy them. But my point is that an anxiety about returning to work that's starts with, a fear of the virus, can turn into a broader anxiety. And what we're trying to engage on is, what I'm trying to kind of bring to their attention is that, demanding that people show up. They're now saying you can work hybrid. So you can be 3 days, they want 3 days a week in the office and 2 days at home. But demanding that is not going to solve the anxiety problem. Just demanding it doesn't, obliterate. And doing physical things like improving the safety of staff doesn't solve what's happening on the tube. And it doesn't solve the fact, as some of us have said, that when you get to the office, what you get is a general feeling of depression, that you're not one of the high flyers. You walk in and go, oh God, I hate everybody, I hate my boss, and I don't want to be here. So, these kind of physical things they're doing, going, well, why would anyone not want to come back to work now? Don't quite solve those problems. And so one of the things that I suggested, we went to the health and safety meeting this past week. It's a monthly meeting that is across the whole organization, and I'm a union rep on that. And I said, maybe this is when certain teams ought to be trying to think of outdoor events in the summer that are not work related, that you can just go, we're going to set aside this time. And so everything is done to make it okay to come out of hours on the tube and on public transport, on trains, because they can be rammed now at rush hour times, and gradually entice people to come out of their homes. Because I do think it's important for some people to leave their homes now. The isolation that some people are suffering is extreme. And so you get to the point where, I'm kind of representing on both sides. I don't want them to be forced, but I also feel that there should be big efforts made to encourage, and it shouldn't be with a stick, And
anyone else want to contribute? Lynn, Zainab?
Do you mean on the point about people returning to the office?
The COVID safety and returning to the office, yes.
Yeah, so my workplace has been pretty much closed for about 2 years. And in fact, many of my colleagues have taken the opportunity to move up north or to Wales or to down south. They don't live anywhere near the office at all anymore. And now that we are returning to the hybrid is an option. There's also an option to work from home entirely, so to come in up to sort of 4 times a year, or there is an option to be a full-time office worker. And some people definitely have made special arrangements to go in to support their mental health, whilst things were going on. But for the most part, actually, many of my colleagues have been happy to be able to work at home and to not have to do the commute and to have the days scheduled. And I know this is going to change from industry to industry, and it's going to change from different levels and all of that, because I work in academic journals publishing, which is going to be completely different from being a journalist. I totally appreciate that. But that idea of going in, say, once a month and seeing everybody then, and having that, this is my day where I see everybody in the office, but the rest of the time I work from home, I manage my hours, I can connect with colleagues online. We work really well online in a way that I don't think we ever would have done before. And I would say that it's given some people a bit more opportunity and visibility who in the office were not seen and were not maybe recognized. And I certainly know that for me, my promotion was as a direct result of the time that I've been able to focus on my work and to be able to build up ways of working that have supported me and supported my colleagues that I wouldn't have been able to do in the office. So it's not a one size fits all, especially when it comes to people with impairments, or when we look at intersectionality. It's going to affect different people in different parts of the workplace differently.
Yeah, I second that. I think sort of like future of work and how people use offices is essentially the most complicated thing, because there are so many varying needs and attitudes. The way that our workplace is approaching it at the moment is that we're still in a little bit of an experimental phase, and that's a little bit to do with what I discussed earlier about having quite unique cultures and ways of working around the business. The thing that we're being really vigilant about is essentially equity, that there is a high baseline, and then in terms of sort of like where we end up with on policy, and that essentially everyone is getting good treatment, even if somebody else is getting exceptional treatment. With the sort of we're potentially about to face a mess, which I'm not looking forward to, in that a lot of people have, as you've said, kind of moved away from London, but a lot of it has been done in a kind of informal, like, yeah, that'll be fine for now way. And we haven't yet hit the point of like amending existing contracts. So I can't wait for the policy to hit for a lot of contract negotiations to come into play. In terms of how it affects mental health, like that has been a really, really big consideration, and one of the reasons that I sort of insisted that I needed to be on that Future of Work forum. For some people, being in the office is really important. I find it really helpful to hang out with people so that I can chat nonsense all day. It's fun. But I also know that there are people, I heard from one member, and this was just like super sad, who said that being at home was a little bit of a relief because they didn't have to deal with racist microaggressions all day. And I was like, well, that really sucks. So, there's a kind of a dual responsibility there of both advocating for her to be able to have the flexibility she needs in order to look after herself, but then also trying to deal with the underlying issue that was preventing her from using the office in the first place. I'd say that this is actually one of the areas where we've worked most with our disability network at Penguin. We have kind of colluded with each other on making sure that we're delivering the same message to HR around restrictions in the office and mask wearing and testing and the rest of it, but also have tried to make sure that we are advocating for them when it comes to essentially how members of disabilities might be affected by being locked out of a workplace that they feel unsafe in, because that can affect things like progression. So yeah, it's a lot of like intersectional considerations all of the time, but it's just something that we're going to have to like just stay vigilant on, I think, because it's really important. And I think particularly I was reading recently, just because May Day had just passed, good old International Workers' Day, and I was reading about the Grunwick dispute in the 80s, and actually how much South Asian members of the union actually dealt with racism from within the union. And I'm really determined, particularly in a media industry, to make sure that the union is one of the last places that happens, and just make sure that we're really taking care of people's individual mental health needs that are rooted in the identity that causes them to have the experiences that they have.
Thank you, Zainab. Yeah, there's an interesting question in the chat that I'd like to put to you as well. That Julia Gregory, who's saying that it's troubling that a lot of the failures mentioned suggest HR not being proactive, managers thinking it's okay to say the way to handle PTSD is making someone busy, which sounds like it comes from a lack of training or awareness. And how can HR become more on the ball and walk the walk? And certainly from my experience, I've found that HR actually manager protectionism. So I'm not always sure that they're on the side of the worker. So, I wonder what you think of that. Do you want to start, Emma?
I think that's so funny that you said they are manager protectionist. In fact, actually, each kind of consulate, whenever I'm representing somebody, I'm partly trying to manage the expectations of the person I'm representing to say, you will get pushback. That's the first thing that's going to happen, is there's going to be a very unpleasant pushback, which you will have to experience, and I'll be alongside you. But that's the first thing that will happen. But what I've found is I've kind of changed the way I work over the years. So I try to get into HR and have individual conversations with people so that I can become friendly with people in HR who are likely to be dealing with it. So I go in there almost like a secret weapon, and I chat about them and their kids, and I try to get them to listen to me as a person and not to react to me as a representative of the union. Because then you immediately get a resistance, and what you want to do is actually improve the conditions for the person you're representing. And in terms of increasing, the general awareness, I think, to be honest, at the FT, the HR do provide everything. They tick every box. I mean, it is box ticking, but they tick every box. There's training available. They're well versed in what they ought to be doing. And still, the line managers, in my experience, are on the whole too busy or too uninterested or too unable to take in the information for it to make a blind bit of difference. So it's a work that's never done. You know, you just keep pushing.
Unfortunately, we're running out of time, so I apologise. And obviously we want to have a 1:30 start so that if it is sunny where you are, then you can have the rest of your afternoon. So I'm going to have to finish it here, unfortunately. And I just want to thank Emma, Mark, Zainab and Lynn for their contribution, and actually all of the speakers today. And just a few final thoughts, really. I often hear the phrase, as you enter work, to leave it at the door. The idea that you have to almost be a robot once you're in work and just do what's requested of you. And it's not always possible to do that when you have issues with mental health or anything really, because we're actually human, we're not robot. So this is why I believe being part of a union is so important. And, you know, when things start to go wrong, where else can you go? Where do you turn to? There are a million tiny stresses and strains in the workplace, and in our profession, we tend to ignore them. And often that until it's too late. So it's important to recognise the signs yourself, but also for employers to step up and recognise the part that they have to play to alleviate those issues. And that's why we exist as a union, to hold the employer to account and to remind them of the importance of being kind and upholding respectful values in the workplace. So that's all I wanted to say in conclusion. And again, I'd just like to invite anyone who is currently facing or affected by any of the issues we've talked about to use the important email addresses that have been put in the chat. We also have quite a few links in the chat to our events that will be taking place over the next month or so. So please, you know, sign up for those. I'm sure they will be very, very useful, as I hope today has been. So thanks to everyone for attending and participating today. We're going to follow up with an email containing links and resources and contact details if there are cases or questions that you need to raise within the union. And we have regular health and safety rep briefings, equality rep briefings, and you can also sign up to the Equality, Diversity and Inclusion Network. And if you're interested in the reps training courses, you can find more information on the website or get in touch to find out more. Members are represented in a number of ways throughout the union on the NEC and our councils, including sector-specific councils, the Equality Council, the Black Members Council, the Disabled Members Council, and our LGBT+ network. So there's links in the chat for all of those. This event has been organised with input from across the union through the support of NUJ Training Wales, NUJ Training Scotland, NUJ Training, the Irish office, and our Health and Safety Committee, Equality Council and Disabled Members Council. Thanks to the councils and branches who have contributed funding to match that provided by NUJ Training Wales and Scotland, and all of the individuals involved with the work that has gone into putting the event and workshops together. We welcome your feedback on the event and want to hear your ideas for future workshops and resources that will support you, whether as individuals or as reps. And we'd be grateful for your feedback. We have a form, which is very short that you can fill in. And finally, thanks to all of their speakers, all of our speakers today for their valuable contributions, to Norma and Julia for providing the speech to text service, and to everyone who's been involved in organising and contributing to this conference. Natasha, Caroline, Ray, Zena, Catherine, your help has been invaluable. And a reminder to sign yourselves up to the workshops and let other members know. Thank you so much and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.